Skeletor, what have you done to She-Ra? What manner of science or sorcery did you use to bring her to such a frail state?
I've done nothing to her, He-Man. Her strength remains, despite appearances. As for her memory, the powers that be have rebooted her. She no longer remembers you.
The heck is a He-Man?
It's been a long time coming, hasn't it? Talking about this show. I'm going to break a bit from the usual format and talk about the show holistically. More about its characters, how they work with the storyline, but also I am going to be talking about their designs. Don't worry about that. That said, if anybody wants to really know my opinion on it, I think that it is quite a mixed bag. It really wants to be kind of like the next Avatar or Wakfu, but it falls short for a great number of reasons, one of which I'll get into right away. Starting from the top, I think the intro is the most reflective of the overall show. A bunch of talking about how big the adventure is going to be and all that jazz about the Great Rebellion. All to the most bland beat I've heard in a show. I'm no expert on music, but I think that it could use a melody, something a bit more like this. The old show may have aged like blue cheese, but the melody of She-Ra's theme is very distinctive. It's energetic, lively, bombastic. It gets you energized for the show. The other just makes me glad Netflix lets you skip the intro. Show's main plot itself isn't much to write home about. It follows Adora leaving the Horde to follow her destiny as She-Ra, which is now a title that gets passed down. Sounds very familiar. Aside from that, there are two subplots, one of which is actually interesting to watch, and the other probably the only reason why the show has retained any viewers. Yet we will need to cross that bridge much later. Now let's get into the meat and bones of the video, the characters. The overall design of Adora is close to the original run. You have her Horde uniform with its simple yet solid reds and white coloration. It's alright. Her conveyance is good too. The show's very generic running and walking animation actually work well for her since she is from the Horde and they're a bit conformist. That said, I would have liked her to ditch the uniform to solidify her shift in alliance, which is actually a holdover from the old show that really wasn't needed. I mean, you've got a bigger budget, a costume change would be welcome. There is a dash of authenticity to this design. The pulled back hair is a welcome addition, as is the more youthful appearance. As far as her character is concerned, there are a couple of aspects that I thought were lacking that needed to be brought out. The first is her tactical knowledge as being a Horde force captain, and her empathy. There were instances of those aspects early on, but over the majority of the episodes, these parts of her character were just kind of glanced over, only to suddenly return at the final few episodes. In design and execution, Adora is a B. She's still a bit rough around the edges, could use a bit of improvement as the seasons go on. She-Ra herself, however, is a mixed bag in both design and how the character is handled. Superficially, the original color scheme is there, as is some of her original elements. There's that Valkyrie look that's somewhat retained, especially at the season finale. However, the standard design seems very lacking. One commenter in the original video that sparked this whole series put it, "Take away the shoulders in gold, and that's a tennis dress." Can't put it better myself. I mean, this overall design is a little undercooked if you ask me. Also, her transformation sequence is quite underwhelming due to a combination of lackluster music, and an overall underwhelming sequence. Just compare it to magical girl transformations that have come out within the last decade, 2 decades. It's nowhere near them. When doing a canned transformation sequence, it's a chance for the animators to show off. Even the Filmation version understood this and used their limited budget to make the transformation more bombastic than He-Man's. But, to make things perfectly clear, let's actually examine this sequence in its entirety. Alright, so she brings up the sword, we transition, she brings it in front of herself, and she grows a few feet for some reason. She swings it once, then swings it again because apparently the first time just wasn't going to do it, then makes a circle, then it goes into actually the best part of the transformation, the ring of clothing transformation. While not exactly the most inspired thing, is still effective, it's actually well crafted. Then her hair comes out. I would have changed the timing on that so it pops out a bit more, give it a bit more energy into that. And then her crown comes out. Now, if it had stayed at that, I actually would have liked it. But then it keeps going. Her hair is then used as a transition into the next part of the sequence, where she puts her fist into her hand, summoning her gauntlets, which for some reason did not appear when she was enveloped in that energy. Okay, fine. Then she grabs her sword and turns to a pose that I can only describe as kind of being meh. Sure, it's a callback to the original, but it looks very bland. There's not even an expression on that face. From the sampler of magical girl transformations that Stargazer gave me, most of them reflected a bit on the user's personality. This tells me that, quite frankly, She-Ra, and to an extent Adora, doesn't have much of one. It can make sense for her being in the Horde, but there should be at least something. This is our hero, the person we're supposed to root for, relate to, feel for. But it's not connecting. It's ending on a very sour note. Regardless, onwards to how She-Ra was handled in the actual story. Back in the original Masters of the Universe continuity, She-Ra and He-Man were just empowered versions of themselves. They were merely personas which the characters put on. The power they wielded was derived from the Castle Grayskull, which is why they would say those invocations when changing their forms. She-Ra in this version is a title that is passed down, and Adora is just the most recent iteration that has been lost for some time duration. You know, back when I started this series, I thought character integrity and authenticity was some sort of balance. That if a character was to be adapted properly, one would have to hamper their uniqueness to suit the established medium. Apparently, the writers decided, you know what, let's just rip off Avatar without considering what that means to the story. She-Ra is no longer an aspect of Adora. She's not a symbol of her and the rebellion as a whole. She is now a pawn in a game larger than herself. I think this takes away from Adora's more personal motivations. She's not She-Ra because it's her true nature, or because it's her conviction to do what's right. It's because she must. She was put there to bring balance to the planet. Oh man, she really is just the Avatar with the serial numbers filed off. Forget the wonky proportions, forget the weird androgynous figure that makes little sense. In a sense, it's more of the Keyblade effect, where a story element or power loses impact the more people have used it. The Avatar at least managed to somewhat avert this by having the whole past lives deal, making it a little bit unique for each Avatar. Until a certain someone got that feature deleted. I just don't think that this She-Ra heritage thing was a really thought out idea. It really brings the character down to a C. In isolation, it would have been fine, but She-Ra was better off not being a knockoff of the Avatar. Now that I'm done chewing out She-Ra, let's go to a character that fares somewhat better, at least in terms of story. In design, there is some room for improvement. Glimmer's colors are fine. They show off her princess aspects using pink and purple with white accents and gloves. It's just that the outfit itself is very lopsided. I understand having an asymmetrical design conveys her desire not to be the pristine princess that her mother wants her to be, but it's just too much on one side. Maybe get rid of the left glove and move the pauldron to the right to counterbalance it. But it's alright. It's not terrible. Glimmer as a character is a huge improvement. During my sample of the original series, Glimmer had very little exposure, and quite frankly, awful powers. To say that she had an overhaul is an understatement. As mentioned before, she has issues with her overprotective mother, and she's basically been a shut-in. This makes sense to give her a stocky build, unlike some other character, but we'll get to her a bit later. Aside from that, they gave her teleportation powers, so she can actually be useful. I'd say that she's definitely an improvement over the original. Not that the original set a high bar or anything. Gee, that seems to be a running theme here. It's an okay design for an okay character, with a few visual hiccups. I'll give that a B. Onwards to Bo, and let's just get some of the design aspects out of the way because those are the least of his problems. Firstly, I would like to announce that his bow strap is not pink, it is in fact brown, giving him a sensible color scheme, thus making that aspect not bad in the least. While he has the common features that would define the previous bow, there are some issues with him in the conveyance department, specifically in his animation, which is utterly bland. There's little characterization to him beyond a guy with a bow, which really summarizes how he's written too. Bo's character is all over the place. His characterization seems to flip between comic relief and caring advisor. Other times he's the designated hype man and exposition dump for the Princess of the Week. For example, in the episode where they introduce Entrapta, he geeks out over her engineering feats and mentions how he's been working on trick arrows, but do the trick arrows or his apparent affinity for inventing things show up anywhere outside of this episode? Nope, not once. Throughout the show, I wondered if Bo was even supposed to be a main character. What do we know about him other than him being Glimmer's friend? Let's look back at the original, shall we? Let's see, he was the first rebellion member we were introduced to. He was a gentleman warrior, had a talking companion who he could banter with and keep his pride in check. Sounds completely different, doesn't it? Yeah, it is. Bo is a C. While his design isn't awful, I think the team needs to figure out his character a bit to make him the least bit memorable. Now on to Glimmer's mother. I really like this design. They fixed her hair to match her clothes. Conveyance-wise, she does come off as being very queenly. She's also got a bit of a fairy motif to her. I don't have any problems beyond the show's average to bland animation bogging the characters down. For the writing, she's fine. She's actually got a backstory that ties into Glimmer's character arc while having one of her own. I'm not going to go into detail as it's probably one of the 2 arcs that people can actually get into with this show, which really isn't saying much, especially when the main plot isn't one of them, but she's still good. She's basically a more refined Glimmer, and as such, I'll give her a B+. I also really like Shadow Weaver. My goodness, why are the side characters getting more attention to detail than main characters? Seriously, guys, seriously. This design's very much on point. The horde colors are arranged very well. The look is more intimidating while expanding upon what was, quite frankly, a very plain original design. Her characterization is actually fleshed out as she has a key role in Adora and Katra's background, which I will not spoil too much here. She's probably one of the better done characters. It's a really good design that vastly improves upon the original, and that's why Shadow Weaver is taking the first A on this episode. They played it safe with Hordak's design. They kept his blue and black color scheme and went for a more tyrant vibe with his looks. Unfortunately, because they decided to make him more like a tyrant, he doesn't have too much exposure. It seems like they wanted to make Hordak into Fire Lord Ozai without understanding why he worked. Ozai worked because we basically had a miniature version of him chase the party around, that being Azula. We really don't have that in Shadow Weaver or Catra. They want to overthrow him and take over. They both have very different mentalities than he does. So we don't really get a good idea about his characterization beyond,
I am bad guy tyrant number 14,703. Snow cones are forbidden in the Horde.
You see, the whole Overlord thing was actually Horde Prime. Hordak was really just an underling of him and had a propensity for dirtying his own hands when his underlings were too inept. Pity we couldn't see that here. The design is solid, but the characterization is lacking. B. Now for the moment you've all been waiting for. The reason why anybody bothers watching this show, Catra. I have got to say the Horde's colors go well with Catra's brown hair and sandy fur? Skin? I don't know. Nonetheless, color arrangement is on point. Also, she's a cat girl now, throwing away the whole turning into a recolor of Cringer's Pounce animation. Speaking of animation, the Borders actually decided to give this character an ounce of personality, and thus gave her cat-like animation. Well, sometimes. Now, from a character standpoint, they drew out the jealousy part that the original Catra had, and mixed it with a kind of romance friendship with Adora. I think for the most part it was handled alright until, and to avoid total spoilers, I'm just going to leave this quote from one of the last Let's Plays of the Super Best Friends.
I think it is a baffling story decision to have the character confront the actual realistic problems with their behavior, have them almost realize it, and then completely reverse everything about their development and go, no!
Well,
Because Pat practically took the words from my mouth. Catra is almost great. She just needed a bit more attention in the animation department and some minor tweaks in the show's writing. A-. Last is a character I nearly forgot to put in, which is saying something because I remembered to put Natasha in the bonus round. That's how little I think of Swiftwind. Visually, Swiftwind is paradoxically both a simplification and slightly more complicated than he needs to be. See, the wings have more colors than are needed and come off as being more garish than necessary. He's also lost his armor, which She-Ra originally beamed onto him when he transformed. But aside from that, he's serviceable. I mean, it's hard to mess up a alicorn? Pegacorn? I'm not certain on the terminology for that, but nonetheless, winged horse, it's hard to mess that up. Now, Swiftwind is actually the worst character in the show from a writing standpoint. Forget Bo's indecisive characterization, Seahawk's general cheesiness, and the nearly non-existent pair that is Spinnerella and Natasha. They're just disappointing. Swiftwind is infuriating, and it's not exactly what you'd think. It's not just that he spends most of the season doing nothing but freeing other horses, which aren't even sentient like he is. No. What gets me is that he does all of that with not even bothering to help the main characters. Then, all of a sudden, he decides to come back towards the end of the season because now of all times he feels that Adora's in danger, as opposed to all the other times that she was. Though first I have to give a bit of context. During the episode in question, Adora is looking for a way to restore Glimmer's magic. So she heads to an ancient ruin in order to get information about She-Ra's healing powers. Eventually, she winds up in a simulation and talks to Light Hope, who, in a manner similar to Aang's chakra training, offers to help Adora, but at the cost of leaving her friends behind for years. Adora almost takes up the offer, except for her friends arriving on the scene. All of a sudden, Swiftwind manages to contact Adora due to a connection the two share. From a lore standpoint, I can understand that, but from a character sense, it doesn't make any sense for Swiftwind to give two craps about Adora despite his connection they have. Again, all he did was kick down some stable doors and not care about the conflict of the show at all. If Swiftwind was actually involved earlier and he was an established member of the team, I wouldn't consider it an issue. It would have just made more sense to have Glimmer or heck even Bo do it. In fact, I'd be less shocked if Catra immediately did a 180 and gave Adora the you have friends, come back to us pep talk instead of freaking horse guy who just did nothing the entire season. Well, that or just backhand her into consciousness, that probably would have been funnier. Getting back on track, Swiftwind's final grade is a C-, if only because the visuals aren't that bad. Now onwards to the bonus round! Because there are so many characters introduced in this 13-episode season, we could not possibly dive into all of them while still having a reasonable runtime. So, let's just go down the list. Light Hope. She's the sorceress now, despite totally not having anything to do with the Masters of the Universe. Absolutely nothing to do with it, guys! C. Perfuma.
Get a haircut, hippie!
B-. Frosta. Wonder if her parents died in a shipwreck too. A-. Castaspella. Not actually a princess of power. B-. Scorpia. 2 words. Zarya recolor. That's it. She's pretty fun to have around. B+. Madame Rat. Somehow managed to do even less than Hordak. C+. Vermista. Great design. Boring character. Do something with her. B-. Seahawk. Too much cheese, not enough ham, and desperately needs his bean cutlass. C-. Natasha. Literally who? I don't even remember if she had lines. B-. Design's alright. Spinnerella. If it weren't for the strange decision of making a wind-based character chunky for very little reason, nobody would remember she was even in the show. C-. Entrapta.
Your friends left you for dead! Because you're a nerd!
Okay, I believe you.
A genuine improvement, and a very endearing character, if a bit one note. A-. Prince Adam. Alas, the prince will not be appearing in this show. Well, that's all I have for She-Ra. If you're starved for science fantasy or just fantasy shows in general, maybe give it a shot. However, I would suggest other more well-constructed and animated shows first, as its animation can be stiff at times. Other times the characters may not be at the proper angle for the shot, not to mention that some shots make me wonder if they even have model sheets, because I remember Entrapta being a bit scrawnier than that in the show. Writing needs a bit of tweaking here and there. Again, there are some interesting plot threads to follow if you really want to get into it, but it's just a mixed bag. Sure, it's generally, with some notable exceptions, an improvement over the original, but really, is outdoing Filmation a high bar to clear? No, it isn't. Sure, shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender, Walk Fu, and what have you do set the standard higher, and they are indeed good shows. However, I would try to break down exactly why they work, not so much as copy what they did, which seems to be another key struggle that this show has. I've been comparing it a lot to Avatar: The Last Airbender. And there legitimately are a lot of similarities between them. You've seen them. And it just comes off as, this worked for this show, let's just do that. Rather than, okay, how can we make our show better? How can we tie these side plots into the bigger picture? To an extent, they do that. Now try fleshing out some of the characters. There is room for improvement. It may get better. Who knows? Maybe I'll follow it up with a Season 2 review whenever that comes out. But that'll do it for this really long episode. This time I'm going to pass the decision of the next design dungeon to the audience. What would you like me to review? Leave a comment below if you've got any suggestions, or if you want to say something about She-Ra. Can't wait to see what I'll be reviewing next.
Catchers of Thunder, and there's nothing you can say to convince me otherwise.